God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Overwhelmed? That's how I would have felt upon hearing these words from Jesus. As the disciples watched their friend ascend into the sky on clouds, I want us to step into their sandals and see things from their perspective, and not just from our point of view of knowing the story and where the story goes next. And often, you all will hear in my preaching a reminder for us to see ourselves in the story's side characters, not just in the main character. Or as the younger generations call them, NPCs. You know what an NPC is? What is it? A non-player character, that's right. So that's a character in a video game that isn't a player. It's just a little person that you end up talking to. But it's important for us to be reminded of these non-major, non-player character types, because far too often we like to identify with the main character. Far too often we think too highly of ourselves and we jump to the, oh, I would have recognized Jesus first before anybody else. It would have been no problem for me because I know how to play this game. Well, or we would look at it and say, yes, I am the prodigal son who returned from my life of gallivanting, and now I, me, myself, and I am good with God, and that's all that matters. But we need to, more often, find ourselves identifying with these side characters that are sometimes named and sometimes not named, because they are witnesses to what is happening. And today's NPCs are the disciples. When you're witnessing what is happening, you aren't the main character. You pull yourself out of the situation and see it from a more full perspective of what is happening. I think that's why lawyers pull in eyewitnesses to attest to what they saw. But stepping into those side characters allows us to lean into the emotions and feelings of others as well. What did they think that they were seeing and experiencing? Were they amazed? Did they question what they saw? What were those questions? Were they appalled? Because if we're honest with ourselves, we must recognize that we too would be asking questions at some of the stories in our scriptures. Because it would be confusing, but amazing to witness what they saw. And it's okay to ask those questions, because we're not perfect. That's why we have church. So it's okay for us to sit here and hear this story of ascension and say, wait, what? Jesus ascends into clouds? We're people of reason here. How do we reason this? And I think it's fine to question, because that's what the disciples would have thought as well. Staring at the sky, thinking that this makes no sense to them, staring in bewilderment. And I'm sure that as the angelic appeared and confirmed for them what they had just witnessed, that bewilderment changed quickly to an overwhelming bewilderment. You see, their friend, their teacher and guide, the one who Peter, one of them, called the author of life. He was killed, rose from the tomb, walked with them for another 40 days, and then just rides out on a cloud. What a roller coaster. And they witnessed it all. But in the ascension, that's when it all becomes real. The disciples now realize that they are now the ones to bring the message of Jesus and God's love to the ends of the earth. That God's love is not just for one group of people in one place at one time. Not just continuing the ministry of Jesus that Jesus was doing in Jerusalem, but taking it to all of Judea and Syria and to the ends of the earth. Jesus says, friends, I know the last 40 plus days, they're kind of rough, a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but Soon I'm just going to bounce and it's going to be on you at that point. Now, for us 21st century Americans, I want us to recognize that this isn't taking the reins over at the accounting firm you've been working at for 30 years. But congratulations, that's awesome. I would love to celebrate with you. But this is Jesus telling his friends, y'all know all that stuff that I've been talking about for these last 3 years? Yeah, that's on you now. Oh, and you know how we've been doing all of this work in just this relatively small geographic area? Well, yeah, you got to take all the stuff I was talking about to the rest of the world. You know, heal the sick, restore the sight to the blind, teach people about loving their enemy, restoring this fragmented world, the entire world. You're going to have to cross borders, learn new languages, and by the way, you know what happened to me? Chances are, probably going to happen to you. Yeah, I would be overwhelmed. Because my goodness, their immediate lives were in such turmoil. Fear of the authorities, both religious and political. Their group had completely fallen apart. After watching their friend die, rise again, stay with them for 40 days, and then ride out on a cloud, in holy confusion, they must be wondering what is next. In our own lives, we have these experiences where we just feel as though these clouds are gray and it gives us uncertainty and confusion. I call those the great clouds of unknowing. And if you hear me in pastoral prayer times, you may hear me saying that phrase. But whether it is awaiting results of health tests, or awaiting an acceptance letter to your number one school, or awaiting the news from a family member who is overseas, or awaiting if the sale is going to go through. These are all great clouds of unknowing. Does this sound familiar, Chalice? Here we are on this tumultuous roller coaster that is reality, staring at the great cloud of unknowing if this sale is going to be the one. This place that the community called Chalice has called home for many years, the place that was and still is central to this community's gathering for worship and sharing of God's love. This building and campus serves not only as a place of welcome for us, but for all who seek refuge in God's welcome and love, just in the same way Jesus did in his context. And when the decision was made to sell, that was a recognition that this church believes in resurrection. But if resurrection is going to occur, then that means we have to experience loss and death. Now, I don't think anyone here anticipated this long and painful of a closing. But this building, as we sit in it, well, we are in those 40 days between resurrection and ascension. We still have Jesus with us, this building, but we don't really know for how long. And technically, it's not 40 days, but 90-day periods, because why would realty use holy numbers? I don't know why But at some point soon, the mission of this building will close. It will die. And yet we, the community, you and I, Chalice, not these walls, we will have a new task ahead of us. Instead of welcoming people to this place, to this building, instead of being caretaker for these few acres, we will be going to the ends of Gilbert to welcome those who have been sent to the ends of Gilbert. That's our mission field. And the good thing is that the death of Jesus wasn't the end of the story. Even the resurrection of Jesus wasn't the end of the story. And guess what? The ascension wasn't the end of the story either. Because next week we celebrate Pentecost, the birthday of the church. So a second reminder to wear your red. But spoiler alert for next week, even Pentecost isn't the end of the story. Just like when the Council of Nicaea created the Nicene Creed. That wasn't the end of the story. Or just like when Martin Luther nailed his theses to the door, that's not the end of the story. Or just like when Alexander Campbell, one of the founders of our movement that we call the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, said no to barriers to God's table, that wasn't the end of the story. And just like in 2012 when we lost a lot of our congregations in our movement because our movement chose love of neighbor, that wasn't the end of our story either. Just like the selling of this property is not the end of our story. Because the story of God's church, the story of Jesus Christ, is never ending. It is always living and doing mission work in its mission field. And then, at some point, that mission will die in that context, in that one place, at one time, and something new will be